Hey friends, and welcome back to the Mayhem Performance Podcast. This is episode number 26, and we're going to talk all things Masters athletes with two great coaches. We have Mike and Inga, who are in for our Mayhem Performance Camp this weekend. So we thought we'd bring them onto the podcast and just kind of discuss a couple things about the way that we train Masters athletes, how Masters athletes should think about their seasons, and also kind of the main things that they should be thinking about in their actual training that are different from an individual athlete that's 34 and younger. So Mike, do you want to kick us off? You've been working with Masters athletes for a long time.
Yeah,
and the Masters program.
I like how you introed that with leaving out that we are the Masters athletes and the coaches. So that's
I'm
why
a Masters
we're here.
athlete now too.
Yeah. So it's just the old people here doing a podcast. So.
That's why my knees hurt, my shoulders.
Yeah. So sorry, what was the question?
I'd kick it off with this and say, like, what are the main things when you have maybe an individual athlete that comes to you that's 22 or 23, when you're doing an assessment, there are probably certain things that you're looking at. What would those differences be for a Masters athlete if both of them have the goal of competing in the sport of CrossFit?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this on the way up here because I just finished a 7-hour drive, a lot of time for thinking. So in general, the biggest thing, the difference I see of Masters athletes coming off of a general program versus regular age group athletes coming off of a general program, and you talk about this a lot just in general with your design, is a movement efficiency and movement economy. And with Masters athletes, like we were talking about before, the time commitment to take care of our body at that point is larger. And so people can get away with more inefficiencies when they're 25, 26, 27, so they can follow a group program and not feel the negative repercussions of that like Masters athletes can. And so when they come to me, it's more a misappropriation of time in their training towards movement efficiency, if that makes sense. I don't know if that answered the question, but like that's kind of the broad spectrum what I see a lot of.
Yeah, to me, that is the most important thing. I want to see, in particular, as you get into the older age groups, how well you move, and in particular, how well you move compared to your peers, because they're going to be kind of like these tiers of most 50-year-olds are not going to move as efficiently as a 20-year-old just because of the wear and tear on their body from life or other sports or the sport of CrossFit. And also, you don't need to move just as well as the 20-year-old, but you need to move better than the average person that you're competing against in your age group. And the reason is because movement efficiency plays a huge role in how well you can do in a workout. You want to be able to use less effort per rep. And if you do that, then you can be less fit than someone else and still beat them in workouts. Like we see this all the time with something that, let's say thrusters and burpees. There are a lot of Masters athletes, all you that are listening, that know this feeling that the bar is off your shoulders as you go down into the squat. And then when you get it overhead, it's still out in front of you. So there's this constant tension as you do this thruster. And even though that maybe you're still pretty fit and you can get through the workout, you feel like you're dying every time you do that movement because of that constant tension. What if we could get you to the point where you can hold the bar on your shoulders in a nice clean front rack and breathe, and then get the barbell overhead where you can actually breathe with it overhead and there's not this tension out in front of you? Like, those are all the little things that I think, Mike, to your point, that most people are missing. And it's hard because most programs don't address it. Most programs are like, we're just going to build a CrossFit program that's solid. Yeah. Like, we're going to take care of all the movements in CrossFit. But if you're not addressing those things, as you do more and more volume, it becomes worse and worse because of the tension that you're holding. Mm-hmm. Inga, what are the things that maybe you've seen in Masters athletes as you've kind of worked with different people outside of movement efficiency? What are the things that you're trying to identify?
Well, just like, because you're talking about this right now, I feel like the Masters that we have today, they didn't start CrossFit at 14 years old or 13. Yeah. So, but I think with time, that's actually going to change. Like, they're going to have better movement, but it's always going to be something. But for me, it's also just getting to know their story. Like, they've maybe done CrossFit for a while or not. They usually have families and kids, and like, their time is more not precious, but you have to be, as a coach, you have to be kind of more willing to make changes to the programming just regarding to their life. Maybe they have a career, like mid-career, or, just life in general is a little bit more developed for them in a way. So you need to be more aware of that and just kind of dig deeper into their story as well.
Yeah, it's funny because Mike, actually, he's going to pursue his CrossFit Games career this next year. No. we were joking about it before we started the podcast, and Mike and I both were saying like the problem that we have is that we do have full-time careers and kids. And so it leaves us with limited training time. So Inga, to your point, you got to be creative with kind of how you write a training program if you only have 60 or 90 minutes compared to a lot of these games athletes that are 20 or 22. I see the athletes that are in the back at Mayhem and they're doing 2 or 3 sessions a day. And each of those is 90 minutes to 2 hours. They just have more time to spend. So we do, as coaches, I think, need to think about how do we get the biggest bang for our buck in the 60 or 90 minutes that we have, and then still make sure that they're getting better in that time.
Yeah. I think that's the one of the biggest thing. We keep talking about different biggest things, but like I said, the time appropriation. So when I have individuals that are masters, their volume is all over the place because they all have such different lifestyles. Whereas if they're 25, we pretty much know basically where they're at and what they can handle, and we can push that envelope a little bit more. Whereas if they're 40, 50, whatever, then it completely depends on how stressful their job is, what age their kids are at, what activities their kids are in, all those different things. So I have people, all their training for the games right now, and all of them are on different volumes and different loading because of their lifestyle and their schedules. And that's what is for some reason hard to understand is they can, just because somebody else is doing a certain volume doesn't mean that they need to do it to get better. To your point, we got to make sure they're getting better. And sometimes that means pulling back, and they still get fitter because their stress, their overall load on their system is more appropriate.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the most challenging conversations to have with a master's athlete, especially if they come up in the sport where before they got into an age group, they were used to doing a ton of training, or they come from another sport background where they assume that they have to do a ton of training. Or I'll give you one more option, because this is typical with athletes that I've taken on. They followed a program that had a ton of training. So any of those variables, they come in and when we start pulling back in the volume, they automatically get stressed by the lack of volume. And then they think that they're not going to get better. But I've found over the years, working with a ton of masters athletes, high level, low level, all the way in between, that almost everyone responds to a little bit less as they get older, but it needs to be strategic. You're still bringing a lot of intensity. We're still doing the strength work. We're still doing intense metcons, but you're doing them at the right time and in the right phase of training to make sure they're getting the biggest bang for their buck again. Like, we want to clean up all those lowest hanging fruits. And it's really hard to do that when it's just like throwing volume at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Well, in a group program, like I said, I help with our master's track. It has to be a lot of volume because it has to be the most somebody on there can handle.
You're covering the entire bell curve.
If it's the least, then that's obviously not going to push people and not going to help. But most people, to be honest, that I have coming off of the program, it's an adjustment because they're getting less volume, even being a Mayhem coach or a high volume coach or whatever. Because I would say that I am more of a high volume coach, but it's still oftentimes less depending on, like I said, all those other factors that play a factor.
Yeah. And often you have masters that are like trying to keep up with the younger athletes, and their ego gets in the way, and you just have to kind of earn their trust and show them, it also depends how old they are, like which age-related issues come up, like with women, for example, with menopause, premenopause, all that you have to kind of familiarize yourself with as a coach. So you have to like think about all these things.
Yeah, and I would say to the movement efficiency thing as well, something else I was thinking about, and as I've had older athletes, it's almost less of a fitness competition as it is a movement competition. And I've had a few athletes in particular that are in like 55 or 60 plus. And I'm like, look, you're a leg up. They have no confidence because they have no idea where they are. They're new to sport. And I'm like, you're already have a huge leg up because you can do an overhead squat.
Yes.
And that sets you apart from the rest, because when that workout comes out, other people, they may be stronger than you, but they simply can't do it. And so you already have that. In the same way, this is not necessarily a mobility thing, but it's the same way if you have a bar muscle up, or if you have a pistol, or if you have one of these movements that are a little bit higher level, then you're all of a sudden leaps and bounds ahead of the people on the leaderboard just because of that one movement. So it's less like fitness and more of being able to do the workout.
Yeah. To that point, Mike, I think maybe this is like an interesting case study because you work with a couple 35 to 39-year-olds, some games athletes, and then you have some older athletes. And Inga, you probably see the spectrum as well. That's changing a little bit in the 35 to 39 category where you like everyone has the skills, everyone's good, and most people are doing a lot of volume. But then as it maybe 45 to 49, it changes a little bit. And then 55 plus in particular, to your point, if you can overhead squat, if you can do bar muscle ups, if you can do ring muscle ups, then all of a sudden, even if you're not quote unquote as aerobically fit, you will typically win those workouts because if it is a 20-minute AMRAP with, let's just say, handstand walking or ring muscle ups or bar muscle ups in there, even though it may take you longer to get to that movement, you pass everyone that's bottlenecked at that movement.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, I think it's, and obviously it's levels like where you're trying to compete, like the ones that are games levels at those, up to the 50. A lot of the guys that are people that I had that are in like the 45, 50, like those, if you're a games level athlete, you have the movement and then it does become a fitness thing. Sure. But if you're just trying to get there, if you're trying to get to a semifinals or trying to get to a competitive monster games or something like that, and a lot of that's still getting the movement. So it depends on where you fall on the spectrum, obviously.
Totally. I do think though it's important. This is kind of one of the things, just like a mental note I had going into this podcast to encourage masters athletes. If you are the athlete that wants to be competitive, and let's say the goal is to make a semifinal for the first time, then the focus for you as a masters athlete in particular, especially once you get above 50, needs to be developing the skills, even if it's in singles, and movement efficiency. It's not necessarily about your aerobic capacity. Now, do you want to improve those things? Sure. But you can improve your aerobic capacity and be great on all the machines and be able to do burpees and dumbbell snatches and still not make it because every year, sure enough, there are those bar muscle ups, ring muscle ups, handstand walk that will hold you out. And I've had athletes that have had that happen. The handstand walk this year bottlenecks a ton of people in the older age groups, and they were great at everything else. I saw one athlete on the leaderboard that actually won one of the semifinal events and then couldn't do the handstand walk and then didn't make the games because of that. So those movements matter so much when you get to those age groups. Now, for the 35 to 39, Mike, maybe you can touch on this a little bit because JD East, who you work with, one of my close friends, he's going to the games and he has all the skills and can do everything and is extremely strong. What would his training look like versus maybe like the 55 to 59 athlete that is also going to the games?
Yeah. I mean, he's obviously a little bit, I guess not at that level. He's not a unique case, but he's, like you said, he's very strong. He's got some unique abilities that honestly, last time I was talking to him was kind of comparing him to Luke. Like he's very strong, very strong and powerful, but also very enduring on the machines. Like a big guy like that typically isn't that enduring. Like Luke is the same way. It's those like 12 to 20 minute of a lot of muscle contractions that kind of hold him back. And the reality is the 35-year-old group is still really, really, really fit.
Everyone's just so fit.
And that is I remember thinking that I was going to just wait till then and compete. And then I started thinking about who was in that division. I was like, yeah, that's probably not going to work. But those guys are still really, really fit. Whereas another guy like Steve Selman, 50 plus group, like he's working on like muscle endurance in the gymnastic stuff specifically. And that's going to make a huge leap for him because he's got the other things. He's got some home runs. And that kind of is not necessarily master specific. Whereas if you have somebody who has a couple home runs, then you can kind of clean up the other stuff and it just make sure they still have those home runs, make sure they don't lose those. And I would put those guys kind of in those categories. Like JD's got some that he'll win by a long shot. He's just got to clean up the linchpins of his training per se. But I don't think I really answered that question, but
no, I mean, I think it's just a good framework too, that you're going to, with the different age groups, you're coaching them differently. Whereas like most people that are 34 and younger, if your goal is like, hey, I want to make a semifinal as an individual, everyone needs to get better at kind of the same things. Yeah. Whereas when you get to the age groups, your coach has to be a little bit more strategic about my 35 to 39-year-olds, it looks more like true individual CrossFit because now, to Mike's point, and Inga, you mentioned this too, is like the reason the 35 to 39 category is so good is those people did start CrossFit when they were in their early 20s. And now over the last 15 years, now they're in an age group. But most of the older age groups didn't start CrossFit until the last couple of years. So they're still trying to develop the skills and maybe some of the more technical aspects of the lifts and all of those things. I agree with you though, Inga, that I think that'll change. Like in probably 15 years, you're going to have people that are in the 55, 59 that like, well, I started competing when I was 40. Yeah. It's like, well, you got 15 or 20 years of experience now that you can take into this. And I'm really interested to see where the age groups go in general. But
I think maybe to answer that question a little bit more, Charlie might be a good example of that, of how you've developed him over the years and how you've changed his training from where it was with massive volume to pull him back over the last 2 years ish, and how it's changed his. I mean,
he's a great example of. I feel like us as coaches, we need to be very quick at like reading people and kind of seeing where they're at, and if we feel some fatigue or something, that we kind of pull the plug a little bit for them. Like for him, it was also like what he did outside of the gym that really mattered. Just his recovery days matter. Like that's something that he just did not do before. Like his sleep, his nutrition, his like reducing stress for him, like just kind of working on that with him made tremendous difference in just the way he moved and just like slowing things down a little bit for him, or just, what I think the key for him. And obviously the programming as well, like slowing everything down and doing more like strict work and just his mechanics. Like he was very stiff and everything, so we had to just have him relax a little bit more on the floor and off the floor.
Yeah, I wonder if it's just something I'm thinking about since you said that about the stress outside. I feel like a lot of the younger athletes now, I guess because of the exposure with the games athletes, they see the importance of all the little things, the stretching, the nutrition, all that stuff. But some of the older generations, because of their generational, the way they carry themselves, of just like white knuckling through everything, they don't see the importance of that stuff, even though they need it even more. And so just an interesting point that you brought up of that.
They're probably tougher than the individuals, but that doesn't make them smarter.
No, they're definitely tougher.
But that's why sometimes like coaching masters, I feel like I can connect with them on a deeper level, because it's so important for me to be involved like in their lifestyle and their life and what's going on with their job and family and everything.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I heard just from you talking there with Charlie or anybody is the feedback and how important that is as a coach. And that's like one of the main advantages for all those listening of having a one-on-one coach, because you're getting someone that is reviewing that feedback and then adjusting the program based on that, as opposed to you just going in just like, not that gym programming is bad or group programming is bad. Those things are very helpful and it's a great starting point. But if the next goal is I want to qualify for this competition, or I want to get my first ring muscle up, or I want to do X, Y, or Z, then it's really nice to have someone in your corner that can, one, hold you accountable, but two, also be the guardrails for when you kind of start to steer off the cliff a little bit, because it's hard. It's hard for me in my own training to listen to my body and know what I need. Like even as a coach, you need to have other people that are holding you accountable and helping you adjust things kind of based on the day-to-day feedback that you're giving them.
Yeah. I think, something we're going to talk about at the camp is not putting your focus on the leaderboard and your value on the leaderboard. And I think it's typically an easier conversation with masters, but it's often a necessary conversation. So we are not immune to getting lost in that, like 25-year-olds are. Like when we're talking to them, it's hard to get them to realize there's more to life than the leaderboard. With masters, it's not as hard to get them to realize that, but still you have to bring them back pretty consistently. Like, hey, you remember you got to go back to work on Monday. Like this doesn't change your family. This doesn't do anything. So like you got to put things in perspective often. So like I said, it's often a relatively easier conversation, but it's still a necessary conversation to keep their priorities straight.
Yeah. I'll ask both of you guys this and kind of think through it as the other person's talking, but what are the main things then that you would kind of adjust or change in a master's program versus maybe just an individual that like has no movement limitations? So like what are the key areas that you want to make sure that you're touching each week, or maybe the types of movements that you're doing, what you're focusing on throughout certain times of the year?
I guess it comes back to like what age they are again, and like if they're female or male. Like I learned this from you, Mike, actually. With females, it's usually upper body strength that you need to focus on and have that in like 3 times a week, I learned from you. Yeah. And then everything that we've talked about with the outside of the gym. I lost my train of thought there.
I would say the biggest difference is the volume of strength work, the loading, and this may be my bias in general, but I think with masters age groups, especially if they have a big training age, the volume of strength work, it doesn't necessarily mean the frequency is less as far as doing strength training, but the volume, the cumulative load of volume of strength training is definitely less. Just the ability to recover from, just to exaggerate things, a 10 by 10 squat program, like as a 45-year-old, like they're not gonna, the rest of their week is going to be ruined if they do that. And so the overall volume, even in the off season. And then the other thing would be in the off season, doing a lot more, or really throughout the year, but doing a lot more different movement patterns. So not just doing squats and wall balls and deadlifts and the same thing, but getting out of those classic planes that we stay in CrossFit, and getting out of that and teaching them to move through different ranges of motion to develop that strength. And what I always tell them when I'm like talking to them about what the next phase is going to look like or something, I say like the goal of this cycle and these movements is not necessarily to build your 1 rep max. Like if we test a 1 rep max right at the end of the cycle, it probably won't be any better, but the goal is for you to feel more resilient or more durable in these positions. So when you're in the bottom of a thruster, it's for you to feel more stable, because oftentimes y'all know, and you may have felt it before, where you're like, I'm doing thrusters and I feel like something could go at any minute.
Yeah, these hurt. Why does
something's going to pop
break
somewhere? And so the goal is to like take that out of your mind, because if that's out of your mind, now you can move faster and you can move more efficiently through the workout. So if you're more confident in your movement, which is what those phases are for, then kind of to the point of efficiency, now you can express your fitness better.
Yeah, I really like the idea of getting them in different planes, or doing a lot of single leg work versus a bunch of bilateral. The tendency again is that if you start moving poorly, when you're doing a lot of bilateral squatting or bilateral overhead pressing, there's a lot of shifts and compensations that happen. So in the off season, I think it's a great time, even if you're a master's athlete that's listening, that's just writing your own training, start adding some of that in to make sure you're creating a little bit more symmetry with your lower body and upper body, so that you don't have those compensations creep up. And Mike, to your point, so that you can be more durable. I love that word, in the actual season, because as everyone knows, like if you go through the open and then you do a semifinal, let's say you are a games athlete, then you still got 3 months of train for the games. It's a long season and you got to do a lot of high intensity work. So making sure that you're prepared for that and resilient really does matter.
Yeah. And knowing how long it takes you, because again, if you've been doing the sport for a long time, the amount of time it takes you to get your mind and body back ready for that 8 to 12 minute AMRAP is less and less.
Yeah.
And so starting that 3 months out may be too soon, because by the time you get there, you're burnt out on doing that kind of stuff. Whereas like I remember a friend of ours, Mike McGoldrick, like for him to get his level of intensity back takes like one session.
Yeah.
So now he's a different example because he's very explosive, but it's kind of the same as you get older. It takes less and less to get that back. And it takes less and less to get you burnt out on that.
Totally.
So if you do it too early, like I said, you're burnt out. So being careful with that, the amount of times you're hitting that intensity button.
Yeah. I think that would be the other big takeaway for me, is that the intensity is probably more spread out throughout a training week. With a younger athlete, you can give them doses of intensity almost every single day and they recover from it. That's not true for all people, but a lot of higher level athletes, that is true. With a master's athlete, it probably makes more sense. And I would, again, encourage those that are listening to spread that out a little bit more. And then the intensity in those kind of moderate days comes from the focus of technical work. So I still say every day is intense. Some days are metabolically intense, and then other days are more mentally intense. I want to make sure that every single ring swing that I do is as perfect as possible. Or I want to make sure when I jump into my bar muscle up, I'm in the perfect position in this nice, beautiful hollow so that I can start and initiate the rep correctly. Like that stuff matters just as much. And it's true too for the lower or the games athletes that are younger, but they can get away with bad technique or poor form every once in a while. Maybe not as much as they used to, but for masters athletes to be durable and to be resilient, you have to be able to have good movement patterns.
And that starts in your warm up. You have to be intentional with your warm up as well, like good movement patterns when you're warming up. But like talking about the intensity, I think, especially with masters women that maybe have not done, like it takes them a longer time to get up to that intensity. Like we've talked about this, but then again, it's so important for like 40 plus, 50 plus, even 60 plus women to be exposed to that type of training just for their hormonal health, like going out and doing sprints or echo bike sprints. Like it's so important.
Yeah, that brings up another point that we've talked about is just the dose of like plyometric or explosive work, because that's one of the things you lose as you get older. And so keeping that in to where, because they do that 40, 45, they start telling you those things. Like my clean or my snatch just doesn't feel snappy anymore. And it's like, well, part of that is like, sorry. But you can give them more of that stuff, more of that plyometric type stuff to feel that pop. And that is also a sign to potentially pull back on volume, because the reason they may not feel that anymore is because they're getting too much volume and they're just tired. And I know and again, getting them out of those normal movement patterns. I remember somebody told me this a long time ago and I found it to be true, but when we were talking about endurance training and they were saying when they were peaked for their marathon is when they felt the most unathletic. And I would say the same thing for my Ironman. When I was Ironman ready, like I could go straight line forever. But then I got on a basketball court and I'm like, I can't go lateral.
It's like straight line and kind of moderately slow.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
That's good for the Ironman.
It's good for that. But if you get out of that, you can't do it. And so in CrossFit, it's not the same as just running long and slow, but it is, you're always in the same movement pattern and you're never really jumping with any explosiveness. Like if you're doing 150 box jumps, you're just doing enough just to get up there.
Yeah.
And so adding some of that explosiveness where they're actually jumping with emphasis on the explosiveness and med ball throws and things like that to help them feel that a little bit more. They can feel that. And like you said, it is just for general health. It's very good for them. So
yeah. Speed deteriorates quickly as you age if you're not taking care of that in your training. So that is true. I mean, and people get frustrated with their cleans, their snatches, but speed's required for those. And so you actually still may maintain your strength. And in fact, I've actually seen over the last couple of years in particular, masters athletes are retaining strength better than they were before. Probably better training programs. They're doing a little bit more strength work. It's not just Metcons. 10 years ago, everyone would just kind of like randomly go in and do some strength work. And then most days it was just Metcons. Now people have structured strength protocols and most, camps out there are giving that to their athletes. So that's a benefit. However, most people aren't doing any speed-based or like true power-based work. Like even the Echo Bike Sprint example that Inga talked about was extremely important to be able to tap into that. But most people refuse to do it. Yeah. And it's also, to Mike's point, a good indicator of if you are overtrained. If you can't tap into your max wattage on a day, or if you can't jump off of a box with some speed that you normally would, it's probably a good indicator that maybe you are overtrained.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think y'all talked about that on an earlier podcast, but that like 10-second sprint for peak wattage, like I know some people do it like every Monday just to check in and different things, but it's, and that's what people got to understand, that it's not supposed to be like a painful, like lactate threshold type interval. Like it's not, it's just, you're hitting that peak wattage and then pulling off and seeing what that is. And if you can't get there, then that may mean that you need to adjust things a little bit. Now, if it's 3 weeks out from the games, then it's part of the season, but yeah, it may give you some indicators.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to do a little fun question because I just was thinking about this. What's the one, if you were doing an assessment with an athlete and you could only do one movement, what's that one movement that you would do with a masters athlete?
That's good. I think overhead squat.
Yeah, it's hard to go against that.
That's a good one.
Hard to go against that. I was wanting to do something from like hanging, but yeah, it's got to be an overhead squat.
Yeah. Well, I would also agree with that, but since we can't all agree, I'll say squat snatch. So now we're pulling from the ground and then doing an overhead squat. Obviously that becomes extremely hard when you're in the older age groups, but it's a really good indicator of how they hinge, how well they can squat. Do they have the overhead mobility? All of those things obviously matter in the sport of CrossFit.
To change that a little bit, what is the most important, and this can go, obviously 35 doesn't count in this question, but what would you say is right now the most important movement for a masters to be able to do to move up the leaderboard? So not a total bar, that doesn't, in the separator.
Yeah. So. Okay. So if we separated these into age groups, once you're over 55, a ring muscle up.
Yeah.
assuming that they want to make the games. They're not often tested until the games, but if they are, then that is like a huge indicator of your success.
Yep.
35 to 54. Oh man, that sounds so broad.
There is one in that category. I think it waits till, but I would say any kind of muscle up.
Maybe deficit handstand push-ups or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, handstand push-ups and handstand walking again would be other ones that I think after 55 are big. If you can do those, if you can do a strict handstand push-up, most likely you're capable of doing other things that are gymnastics based. Handstand walking has become a huge, a very important aspect of sport. And I like testing handstand walking in an assessment, even if they can't do it, to just see them kick up, because it allows me to see what their shoulder position looks like and how well they can move through space, which is another, Mike, you talked about this earlier, but I think that generation, and this isn't speaking bad, like I think most people are willing to grind and push, like that. There's something special about that, but they never took the time to like really worry about movement. And so they are not very good with spatial awareness. And that also means that sometimes it takes a lot of extra time to get a skill, to learn a muscle up or to learn a handstand walk or whatever other complex skill that may come out. But even more so, then they should be working on that in the off season.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of guys in the 50 plus just came from a Gold's Gym bodybuilding type training so their movement efficiency is terrible when it comes to hanging on, even breathing while they're hanging on the bar, and different things like that. And so, and I would say, I don't have as much experience with females than older, but I would say the upper body strength is even more lacking than it is for the younger people in that division.
Yeah. For sure. That becomes a huge limitation. And I'll just give one quick story. I had the 55 to 59, the games winner last year. I coached her. She's an awesome person, an awesome athlete, but you were talking about movement efficiency earlier, both of you guys were, and she was struggling with strict handstand push-ups, but a lot of it came from what we identified as just a closed shoulder position. She couldn't create torque in that bottom position. So we actually spent more time just opening her shoulder position and then strengthening her in that straight arm strength position of like a handstand hold or pike on box, single arm handstand holds, all those variations. We did that for a couple of months, and it got to the point where we had some probably some tense conversations of like, hey, I want to do more handstand push-up work, or they still don't feel good. And I was like, let's keep giving it time. And I was kind of gambling too. I wasn't sure if it was going to work, but then by the time we got to the game, she was able to do them. She crushed it and ended up winning. Obviously not every story ends that way, but the point of it is you got to start with the basics, and starting with the basics for a lot of masters athletes means going back to the very first thing to kind of wrap up the podcast. Make sure that you're working on your movement efficiency. It not only pays dividends now in performance, it's going to pay dividends later when you want to pick up your grandchild without back pain or without shoulder pain as you lift them onto your shoulders. So like there's more than just performance. It's also keeping you healthy long-term.
Yeah. And the last thing I would add is if you're on your own doing your own program and you're following what I always tell people, like if they're questioning their second session, if you're doing a second session, or if you're thinking about adding a second session, I'm like, if it absolutely doesn't affect your sleep, doesn't affect your family, doesn't affect your work, then sure, we think about adding it. If you have to question any of those things, then it's not worth the benefit. You're not getting the benefit from it. So don't worry.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.